Marine reacts to SCP-610, The Flesh That Hates, by the Exploring series. As always, I'm going to be leaving a link to the original video and channel down in the description below, so go ahead and be sure that you check them out. So as far as this SCP, there's been some mention about it. I believe it was in the Sarkic cult video from the Exploring series that I heard about it. And I think I've also heard about it in some other ones, but obviously not a whole lot. And that I think it was said that it was used as some kind of disease or some kind of infection or something that the Sarkic cults were actually trying to use to, I don't remember if it was taking over the world, but obviously for some ulterior negative motive. I mean, that's as far as I can remember and what I know on this. So let's go ahead and get right into the video. But before we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, really does help me out a lot. Hit that notification bar right there. That way you get notified every time I do upload. Sometimes I upload twice a day, typically working on them in the morning, and then releasing them in the late afternoon to late evening. That way when you all get off work, you enjoy these videos at your leisure. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and see what SCP-610, or The Flesh That Hates, is all about.
SCP-610, The Flesh That Hates. Disease has affected humanity for thousands of years, from the Black Plague, to smallpox, to cancer, causing illness, death, or worse. It's the or worse part that we're really going to focus on today, as SCP-610 is certainly one of the most horrifying diseases in the SCP universe. 610 encapsulates many of the worst aspects of diseases, such as pain, physical deformity, and contagiousness, but it wouldn't be much of an anomaly without turning things up to 11. It's a fairly old and popular article on the SCP Wiki, but is fairly lengthy due to the number of exploration logs, so I'll summarize things for ease of understanding. We see right away that 610 is classed as Keter, which usually isn't a good sign, and the containment procedures mention the ominous phrase, "Containment is impossible." We learn that it seems to be currently isolated in Russia, and that any organism seemingly infected with 610, or coming into contact with something infected, should be immediately terminated with small arms and incendiary weapons, from as far away as possible. 610 seems to spread through physical contact, and there is little concern for transmission via water or air. The Foundation first learned about 610 from the Russian government, after a number of farmers in a region in southern Siberia went missing, followed by the local police, regional police, and a government agent who all looked into the issue. A small military group was dispatched by the Russian government, but managed to quickly withdraw when they found evidence of the infection, at which point the Foundation was notified. Upon first contracting 610, an individual will develop symptoms similar to a contagious skin disease, such as rashes, itching, and increased skin sensitivity. Within 3 hours, blemishes resembling heavy scar tissue will break out in the chest and arms, spreading to the back and legs, eventually covering the entire body. High temperatures greatly increase the speed at which the infection spreads, up to as quickly as 5 minutes to fully cover an individual. Once an individual is covered in the scar tissue, their life functions will cease for roughly 3 minutes, and then they...
Okay, so, I mean, obviously, when it comes to, like, say, a disease, right, my first question is always going to be, obviously, how does it get spread? How long does it take to actually fully take effect? Is there a treatment, etc., etc.? Now, they've really explained quite a few things as far as how it's spread through contact, and they said through touch, so it's just touch. I mean, you could see how contagious that could actually be. Luckily, though, it can be in the water or the air, so it has to be physical touch. They said that higher temperatures of heat can actually increase it, or like higher temperatures as far as like the actual, say, temperature of a room, right? I don't know exactly how fire, for example, would deal with it, because I feel like I don't know if it can be damaged by fire or something that just gives off a lot of heat. But it definitely does make it grow a lot quicker and take over the actual organism depending on what it is. And I'm assuming that would differentiate between if it's a human or like a mouse. So if heat can also make it increase its takeover rate essentially Would cold prolong it, or can coldness be a treatment? Or if as soon as you get it, is that pretty much it? Like you're done. Like you're automatically gonna turn, and there's like no treatment whatsoever. Besides, obviously, death. Or termination, as they like to say.
They will restart at 2 to 3 times their normal rate. The scar tissue will begin rapidly moving and growing, warping normal bodily features in largely random ways. Sometimes the infection will appear to grow multiple limbs, or elongate various body parts, such as the head, and sometimes parts of the individual will split open entirely, resulting in horrifically misshapen figures. Some infected individuals will immediately and aggressively seek out human aid, resulting in further infections. Others will find a place to stop moving and root themselves to the ground, causing their fleshy growths to spread across nearby objects and areas, creating an area hospitable for continued growth of the infection. The Foundation first sent in remote drones to examine the infected region, but after learning that infected individuals aggressively seek to spread the disease and are utilizing a network of tunnels underneath the area to move, they sent in humans. There are a number of exploration logs for 610 for both the unmanned drones as well as the human expeditions. The first exploration was done by a small unmanned drone nicknamed Herbie. Herbie entered into the vicinity of a small village that had been overtaken by the infection, named Site A. There seems to be an estimated 79 infected individuals in Site A, both mobile ones and immobile ones, but this is only a rough estimation. A number of buildings are still intact, but many of them have suffered significant fire damage. After observing the village from a distance, Herbie is moved to enter Site A and follow an infected individual into a home. The home contains multiple infected organisms, and Herbie records the walking infected moving around the small home multiple times before stopping at another infected sitting on a bed. The infected individual proceeds to assault the bedridden individual with a series of furious punches, causing them to flail their arms and unleash a piercing sound. The individual being beaten then projects a cloud of unknown matter from its chest cavity, and the first infected stops its punches and again moves around the home. It sits at the table, and tendrils from its face extend out and break off onto a few plates. It then leaves the house, and shortly after, a group of infected enter the home and consume the infected material from the plates, pressing it into whatever orifice they can on their bodies. The group leaves, and eventually...
This is probably the more disgusting version of SCPs that I've seen so far. And obviously these pictures are making me cringe a little bit. But do these infected, especially if they're human, right? Do they really still possess some of their conscious? Because I don't really understand. I mean, obviously it's just probably the way the disease works. But it's seeming that this disease is somewhat kind of sentient. Or if it's just doing what it wants to do to be able to do like what any species or anything would want to do, which is to live and to reproduce. And I mean, 'cause I just can't get out of my mind that it was beating the one that was on the bed, sits down, drops all the stuff from its face on some plates, walks out, and then another group come in and start eating it. This looks like they're actually in a form of some kind of community, and maybe the reason the flesh was beating up the one in the bed was because it needed it to release that little cloud to, I guess, make food for them. I mean, I don't know if these things, like all the ones right here, need to necessarily eat. But, I mean, that's what it's kind of seeming like. I mean, I could be wrong, but this is going to be one of those weird ones.
So does Herbie, who bumps into the first infected individual. Their facial tendrils are intermingling with another infected. But Herbie continues on into a store. Here he finds more infected, but also a Russian soldier who doesn't seem to be moving, but his eyes are constantly shifting, often focusing on Herbie. In the back room, Herbie finds a pile of bodies, seemingly both Russian military and villagers, but an infected sits on top of the pile, flailing and projecting spores into the air. Herbie leaves the store, spotting a group of infected with their arms connected, standing around a well. One of the infected, a girl roughly 11 years old, grabs Herbie and stares at the drone. The girl's face suddenly expands and explodes outwards as fleshy flaps grab Herbie and draw it inside the girl. The video feed ends here, but resumes 5 hours later as Herbie's camera is pointed straight at the well, with a slimy film oozing across the lens. Herbie responds to no commands, but the camera seems to be moving of its own accord before being destroyed. During the construction of the containment perimeter, several D-Class personnel were infected, and although most of them were put down immediately, a few were put into cold storage in order to slow the infection. In hopes of finding out more information, and possibly an origin for 610, 3 infected D-Class were sent into Site C, which seems to be possibly the first village that was infected. The D-Class are each given a pistol, some food, and an emergency flare, and are also given a gallon of gasoline. They are instructed to enter the site and focus on observing, but if they are attacked or are about to succumb to the infection, they are to cause as much damage to the site as possible. As the D-Class enter the site, the ambient temperature rises sharply, reaching 32 degrees Celsius, or 89 degrees Fahrenheit, keeping in mind this is Siberia. The primary cause of this seems to be a large number of pylons arrayed around the site, which appear to be 2 to 4 infected individuals fused together. Heat vents out of various holes on these pylons, and it's believed that this is an advanced stage of 610, terraforming the environment. The D-Class, who is furthest along in their infection, begins to have a seizure, with the infection covering their body in 45 seconds. Another D-Class kills them with their pistol, leaving their equipment where it is. While perimeter control is giving new instructions to the 2 remaining D-Class, the ground underneath the dead D-Class opens up. A series of ropey tendrils come from within the gap and pull the corpse inside before closing back up again, in the matter of a few seconds. The remaining 2 quickly move into the village, and find a fleshy sphere suspended above the community well by other...
So the fact that they're infected, though, right? It's just a quick little theory as far as them going in there. Would they necessarily still be, in the eyes of whatever this flesh is, like an enemy? Or like someone that they would want to infect? Because technically they're already infected, so there's no need to infect them any further. Unless, obviously, that increases the process. So that's probably why they sent them in there, because they probably wouldn't draw too much attention to themselves if it was somebody who wasn't infected. Which is kind of smart, and also, and the D-Class obviously is, if they're going to turn, as far as the SCP Foundation is concerned, they probably think that they might as well do something, Obviously it would suck to be them, though.
Other fleshy growths. The sphere is comprised of both infected humans as well as infected deer and bears, and it continually pulses every 5 seconds, causing spores to project outwards and float to the ground. One of the D-Class begins dousing the sphere with gasoline and lights it on fire with their emergency flare. A tremendous noise is heard from an unknown location that is described as both explosive and alive. The sound is heard by perimeter control near both Sites A and C, and 15 seconds after it stops, a series of explosions occurred at Site A, and finally, the sphere explodes. One of the D-Class dies instantly from the explosion, but the other D-Class manages to stand back up, and the video footage seems to show them getting flung through the air before an unknown creature smashes the video equipment. When the sphere in Site C was destroyed, aerial footage of Site A showed the infected of Site A going into seizures and convulsions. Immobile infected shriveled up and died, along with any fleshy growths covering objects, and the mobile infected made their way into a single building. This building soon collapsed, revealing a sinkhole underneath it. The sinkhole is the size of 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder, but objects dropped do not produce an impact sound, suggesting a depth of possibly greater than 1,000 meters. Research quickly showed that all presence of 610 infection died at Site A above ground, allowing the Foundation to properly set up stations within the village. They quickly gathered what materials they could, but 2 hours later, seismic activity began to occur, forcing them to retreat back to the perimeter. Immediately after the earthquake stopped, a torrent of spores erupted from the sinkhole, covering a 50-meter radius around it. Right after this, staff members still on site in hazmat suits were attacked by birds infected with 610. Many of these creatures attacked by splitting their heads in half and clamping them down on individuals, pulling them into the air and dropping them into the hole, although only 2 research staff members were dropped into the hole. The creatures were put down with small arms fire, but a second seismic event occurred, causing another eruption of spores, followed by a new 610 entity emerging from the sinkhole.
So it's starting to seem like there's something down there, right? Or like at least, because see, now I'm thinking that there's one head honcho, right? Or like one brains of the operation, right? And it's probably down there, and it's releasing these spores, and it just released this new SCP version of 610, which honestly, I know this probably isn't the picture, it just helped to illustrate it or give you like a picture in your head. But it definitely seems like there's one entity that's controlling them all, kind of like a hive mind. And honestly, hive mind, I've been hearing that word a lot lately, specifically with the Warhammer universe. So yeah, that's kind of what it's seeming to me. And I don't know if there would be one at each of the sites that they've mentioned, or if there's just one and it happened at site A and it's slowly just spreading its infection.
Entity appeared to be an engorged human head, 20 times larger than normal, with no discernible body. The earthquake reached to a 7 on the Richter scale before abruptly stopping, at which point video and radio contact was lost with the on-site team. No trace of the team was found afterwards, and they are considered lost. Clearly, there were far worse instances of the infection located underground, and so the Foundation sent another unmanned drone to explore the sinkhole and any tunnels or caverns it led to. This drone was equipped with aerial capabilities, and begins to fly down the sinkhole for a couple of minutes. Examination of the sinkhole walls leads researchers to believe that it was formed due to a single event, rather than dug out over time. Traces of 610 material are found on the walls, and increase in density as the drone continues to descend. Small tunnels branch off from the sinkhole, but 250 meters down, the bottom of the sinkhole comes into view, sloping sharply into a tunnel heavily coated with 610 material. As the drone continues through the tunnel, it spots a live deer wriggling while being held in place by tendrils. Further on, there are a number of large lumps along the tunnel, which seem to be heavily infected humans. The drone flies past a running stream of water, at which point the tunnel splits, with one descending and one ascending. The drone is sent on the ascending path to make it easier to recover, and continues along the path for 45 minutes, finally coming out of the tunnel into a windy, mountainous region. Here there are the remnants of another village that was once heavily afflicted with SCP-610, and it seems that the buildings still here were constructed entirely out of 610 material. With little else to see here, and the high winds making drone recovery impossible, the drone is sent back into the tunnel. A deep, roaring sound is heard, and the video feed begins to cut out, but shows the drone quickly descending down the tunnel. Finally, the feed shows a massive, distorted human face filling the tunnel and rushing up towards the drone. The onboard weapons are utilized to fire on the face, but the wounds on the entity quickly heal, and soon the drone is swallowed. 3 hours later, the video feed comes back for a few moments, showing a series of structures and a vast number of infected individuals. The camera pans on its own before being destroyed, as if something wanted to show this. You can likely guess what comes next, but
So it's like something wanted to show this. That's even providing a little more subtle evidence that this thing does kind of have a mind of its own at the very least. Now, as far as how complex it is, I don't know. It would have to be somewhat complex to be able to. They said that the city that they had found, right, or that what they came out to, seemed to be entirely covered or constructed of this flesh. Now, I don't know if it maybe wrapped itself around it or if it created it from the ground up. In any case, that's quite a bit the complexity for it.
now that it's clear that the 610 infection is spread deep underground, and they seem to be capable of creating tunnels, the Foundation approved a manned assault excursion. A total of 5 teams were sent into the tunnels, 2 research and 3 assault, in the hopes of setting up a base of operations from which a full assault could commence. The teams descended into the sinkhole and quickly set up a base where the tunnel split. After a base was set up and samples were gathered, the expedition continued on into the unexplored descending tunnel. The group walked the tunnel for 20 kilometers without encountering any 610 entities, and so they requested a transport buggy be brought down to aid the exploration. While waiting for it to be delivered, the team was ambushed by a group of large 610 infected life forms who were seemingly coming out of the walls, or perhaps being formed from the materials on the walls. These life forms seems to entirely consist of 610 material, instead of an infected organism, and small arms proved to be nearly useless, forcing the assault team to rely on incendiary weapons. Unfortunately, a large number of the team were swept away in the water current that ran alongside the tunnel. The assault team now consisted of 3 members, with only a single flamethrower, although they did each possess their standard firearms and short-range personal incendiary weapons. They are instructed to continue the exploration and attempt to locate the lost team members that went into the water. A further 20 kilometers in, the river split away from the tunnel, forcing the team to abandon the rescue mission, in lieu of continuing along the tunnel. A number of hours later, the team reached the end of the tunnel, where they were again ambushed by 610 entities that seemed to be waiting for them. They managed to eliminate the entities, but used up the rest of the fuel in their flamethrower in the process. The tunnel opens up into a cavern containing a somewhat primitive village, with buildings clearly made by humans. Notably, there is a church with a working clock tower, and surrounded.
I don't know if it's me, but I'm hearing a voice other than him. I think that's a part of the video, but I just kind of like started to realize to look behind me, because I don't know if you noticed, I don't have my mirror behind me, so I can't really see it if anyone were to come through the door. My mirror's back over there. But so they found a village down there. Now, I don't know if that village was already down there, or maybe if it somehow brought it down there. I honestly don't even know what to make of this. All I know is that you don't want to be in this area, and I think it was fire, right? Then when the declass poured the gasoline, that seems to be the most effective thing. Now I know like warmer temperatures help it infect faster, but direct fire seems to be its only weakness as far as I can tell. And they don't have any more flamethrower gasoline on them. So I don't know why the SCP Foundation would still have those MTFs still try to go with the mission instead of just calling them back.
Surrounding all the buildings is a depression in the ground filled with what looks like liquefied 610 material. The liquid ripples and moves of its own accord, and the team avoids it as they head towards the church. They have so far not seen any living entities as they enter the church, which contains 4 pews and a pulpit. For some reason, the inside of the church is immaculately clean, and there is a hole behind the pulpit which contains more of the liquid material. Suddenly, the bell in the clock tower tolls, triggering a shuddering and the sound of human screams coming from the ceiling of the church. The team shines their lights on the ceiling, revealing a large mass of 610 material and 6 wooden circles. Strapped to the circles are live humans, coated entirely in 610 material, except for their heads. These humans continued to scream as the wooden circles descend towards the floor. The team hears a creature cry out from outside of the church, and they extinguish their lights and hide behind the pulpit. A figure, seen past the doorway of the church, brings a torch and lights a series of candles, as well as a rope coated in 610 material that causes the fire to spread up to a chandelier system. The light from the chandelier illuminates the captive humans, showing that they seem to be covered in a different type of material that's red and constantly shifting. A group of infected entities enter the church and begin ripping off the red material from the humans, causing them to scream even more. It's believed that the red material is using the humans as a food source, and the infected entities then consume the red material. The infected continue feeding for 6 minutes before the torchbearer hits a gong, and they take a seat in the pews. The torchbearer then suddenly collapses, and a pillar of infected flesh emerges from the hole behind the pulpit, reaching towards the pews. 10 minutes go by, with nothing making a sound or moving, including the captive humans, and finally the flesh retreats back into the hole. The infected entities leave the church, and eventually so do the 3 team members. As they leave the church, however, one of them gets suddenly thrown through the air by a large tentacle, and a flood of infected entities come out towards the remaining 2. The 2 drive back the horde as best as they can as they make their way back towards the buggy, but one of them is killed by the torchbearer entity, who now wields a large crop scythe.
This church. Now, is it possible? Because they said that it was immaculately clean. So, I have heard and I had seen that it was supposed to be theorized that the Sarkic cult had actually some hand in actually not, I don't know if creating the flesh that hates or releasing it, summoning it. Not 100% sure, but maybe this is their church. Maybe this cult was living down there, and maybe some of the people that were going there were some of the ones that were from there and had gotten infected. And they still do like their little rituals, whatever they do, what have you. And maybe it seems like it didn't turn out so well for them. If it turns out that it was a Sarkic cult that actually released them or created them. That's what I mean. That's kind of what's going through my head right now.
The final team member makes it to the buggy, but finds it half covered in 610 material, and looks desperately for another way out. The scythe wielder approaches them, 2 shots are fired, and the camera feed goes out. No further expeditions have been sent into the area thus far. SCP-610 is among the highest rated articles on the SCP Wiki, largely because it's just so incredibly weird. While we certainly have behavior-altering parasites in our world, such as one species of the cordyceps fungus, there's nothing nearly as horrific or complex as SCP-610. The original author of 610 wrote it as a standalone article, but over time, as the concept of Sarkicism developed on the Wiki, many in the community have accepted 610 to be an integral part of it. There have been multiple mentions of the Sarkic cults utilizing a disease known as the Red Death, and it's believed that 610 is their ultimate weapon in their goal of reshaping the planet. Whether a standalone SCP or part of something much larger, SCP-610 is a brilliant and terrifying showcase of the ravages of disease.
Alright, let's go ahead and talk about that for a minute. And the sun is really coming in right now. It's making everything look dark. So, in any case, this is one of those SCPs, again, that I really don't know what to make heads or tails from. So, it does relate to the Sarkic cults. And as far as them having it as their plan to reshape the world in the way they see fit. There is quite a bit of information on exactly what this is, how fast it spreads, what it's weak to, and essentially saying, not really saying it, but kind of implying that there's no real treatment for it. That the only thing you can really do is do what they kind of did to those D-class personnel and put them in a cold environment so they can slow it down. But eventually, obviously, it's going to turn them. The one thing I never really did hear was any mention of whether or not this disease is being controlled by one specific entity, or if it's just a disease doing what a disease does, which is just infect, etc., etc. Now, I would assume that it would have had some kind of, like, maybe, like, when I was saying this, was people that were in the church were probably people from Circuit Cult. Things went bad, they ended up getting infected. Maybe they're the ones having some kind of control. Or when they mentioned about the face eating the drone, chasing it through the cave, that maybe those might be hints or signs of that there is a specific type of leader that is actually controlling and dictating what the flesh actually does. Because if it wasn't, I would have assumed that every single entity would have combined together, kind of like of when day breaks, like how they just keep absorbing the mass and getting bigger and bigger. But the fact that it's still in a cold environment, Siberia, that's probably why, if it didn't start underground, it probably went underground, so that way it's warmer and they're able to spread in that fashion. Now, obviously, it'd be very difficult for it to be able to escape that secluded area, which it seems like it is, because obviously the cold. They mentioned about it trying to terraform it. Hopefully, SCP Foundation at the very least can break down those pylons to avoid that happening, and then it would take some time for it to actually, if it continued to go underground. But obviously above ground, it's going to be very difficult for it to actually get out of there. So, and that's going to go ahead and be it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, really does help me out a lot. Hit that dislike button if you didn't like it. It helps me improve the channel. If you're curious to see what's coming up next, check the description down below. You're going to see a list of about 5 videos. Top to bottom is going to be how I view them. But until then, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.